She investigated killers for a living, but she was one. For 26 years, LAPD Detective Stephanie Lazarus wore the badge while hiding the truth. What exposed her wasn't just DNA. It was her own words during an interrogation she never saw coming. Today on Crime Cipher, we walk you into the room where a killer realized she was cornered. Today we examine one of the most chilling interrogations in law enforcement history. The moment Detective Stephanie Lazarus realized she was no longer investigating the crime. She was the suspect. You're watching Crime Cipher, where interrogations are broken down, minds are dissected, and justice speaks louder than denial. Subscribe now for weekly cases that go beyond headlines. Into the rooms where the truth gets trapped on tape. An invitation with strings attached. On the surface, it looked like just another day at work. Stephanie Lazarus, a veteran LAPD detective with decades of experience, was called in to consult on an art theft case. But this wasn't a routine interview. It was a trap, carefully designed to lure her into an interrogation room without raising alarms. The detectives didn't want to raise suspicion. They claimed to need her help. But their real goal was to get her inside the department's secure interview room, a place where all weapons had to be checked at the door. They knew they were dealing with one of their own. Every word, every movement had to be calculated. The stakes were unlike anything they'd faced before. The friendly mask. From the moment Stephanie stepped inside, the detectives worked hard to make the setting feel informal. They offered light small talk, set a friendly tone, and played the role of colleagues just needing advice. But this wasn't just good manners. It was strategy. In psychological terms, they were using a compatible tone, establishing rapport to prevent defensive behavior too early. The true purpose was hidden behind small talk and false smiles. They slowly began steering the conversation toward a name Stephanie hadn't heard in years. Or so she wanted them to believe, the name that broke the silence. Then came the moment. Do you know a man named John? Ruetten. The detectives purposefully mispronounced John Ruetten's name, a subtle tactic to watch how Stephanie would respond. Her pause was immediate and unusually long. A psychiatrist would later say it lasted 4 times longer than it should have. Her brain wasn't just retrieving a memory, it was panicking. John Ruetten had been her college boyfriend, a man she dated for years and never truly let go. He later married Sherri Rasmussen, a brilliant and beautiful nurse who was found beaten and shot to death in 1986. Sherri Rasmussen was engaged in life. She worked long hours at the hospital, volunteered with kids, and was just months into her marriage. Her death wasn't random. It was personal, violent, calculated, and hidden in plain sight. The case had long been cold, until DNA from a bite mark finally pointed investigators to Stephanie herself. A foggy memory act. When asked about John, Stephanie began weaving a vague narrative. "We were good friends," she said. "We dated back in college, a long time ago." But she was holding back. She failed to mention they dated for 4 years, went on vacations, and stayed in touch for years after. This was no brief college fling. This was the motive behind a murder. But the more Stephanie tried to act casual, the more cracks began to form. Her sentences were filled with vague phrases. Gosh, geez, I don't know. These weren't just verbal tics. They were subconscious defense mechanisms meant to buy time, stall the conversation, and blur details. The psychological pressure builds. When the detectives brought up Sherri Rasmussen, Stephanie's tone shifted. Her breathing changed. She said, "I might have met her, but couldn't remember her name or what she did for a living." She then guessed that Sherri was a nurse. Her expression subtly morphed from confusion to cold calculation. The detectives knew this was their opening, and slowly they began tightening the net. They asked if she had ever had problems with Sherri, if they had ever argued. She denied it, but records, witnesses, and Sherri's family all said otherwise. There was even a report that Stephanie had once confronted Sherri at her workplace and had to be removed by hospital security. The fight or flight moment. Then came the reveal. The moment detectives subtly suggested that Stephanie was being considered as a suspect. Her reaction was immediate. She shifted from helpful cop to defensive suspect. "If you're accusing me, I want to talk to a lawyer," she snapped. "I can't believe this is happening. This is crazy." She'd been in hundreds of interviews herself. She knew what was happening, and her voice betrayed the realization. The tone was no longer soft or casual. It was sharp, erratic, and panicked. She tried to shut down the conversation, but it was already too late. The DNA trap. The detectives moved in for the kill. They asked for a DNA swab, a simple cheek sample. If she had nothing to hide, she'd give it. But Stephanie hesitated. She knew the truth. Her DNA had already been secretly collected. The operation was delicate. Surveillance units tailed her to coffee shops, watching for any discarded item. A straw, a napkin, a cup. When she finally threw away a plastic utensil, they moved fast. That single trace would finally confirm what no one dared to believe. A cop had committed cold-blooded murder. She discarded a drink cup in public weeks earlier. The lab had confirmed the match. The bite mark on Sherri's body was hers. The moment she refused the swab, she sealed her fate. Not because they needed it, but because her reaction was the final psychological clue they needed. Stephanie Lazarus wasn't surprised at being accused. She was angry at being caught, the arrest of a cop. As soon as she stepped out of the room, Stephanie Lazarus was arrested. A 25-year veteran of the force, now in handcuffs. It was a surreal moment for everyone in the department. This wasn't a career criminal. This wasn't a gang member or a repeat offender. This was one of their own. But behind her badge had always been jealousy, obsession, and a crime of passion buried under decades of silence. The verdict is read. In 2012, after a dramatic trial, Stephanie Lazarus was found guilty of the first-degree murder of Sherri Rasmussen. She was sentenced to 27 years to life in prison. John Ruetten, Sherri's husband, delivered an emotional statement. There are no words that can describe the loss of Sherri. Her death occurred because she met and married me, and that thought brings me to my knees. Stephanie now resides in the Central California Women's Facility, confined to a maximum security cell. A once respected detective, forever remembered as a cold-blooded killer. Sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones we trust the most, the ones trained to protect and serve. Stephanie Lazarus knew the law, and she tried to beat it. But in the end, the truth caught up with her. How does a decorated detective get away with murder for 26 years? Was justice delayed or nearly denied? Drop your theories in the comments. We read everyone. Subscribe to Crime Cipher for more real interrogations, mind games, and cases where the truth is the scariest part. Next up, watch When the Interrogator Turns on One of Their Own in our Interrogation Room Psychology playlist.